afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Her Story, presented by Women of Fantasy Football, powered by Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network. And today we have a very special guest with us, hence the special time. We have Shannon Blunt, who is from SiriusXM as a producer. How are you, Shan?
I am fantastic. Super honored to be invited to talk to with you today.
I know it's so fun because I've talked to you, when I've been on serious shows and we've, kind of ganged up against Howard and Jim, and that's always a super fun time. So it's awesome to sit down and talk to you. But before we get in and start talking about, the nuts and bolts of things, I want to bring up Taylor Swift. You were one of the chosen ones and got to see her a few weeks ago in Philadelphia. And since the boys banned you from talking about Taylor Swift on the Fantasy Alarm show, I want you to talk about it here and let us know how it was.
Yeah, no, I was like an honor to get these tickets. My roommate and best friend, she was actually chosen because I got kicked out of the queue
Oh,
like twice. So she went through the trenches, got the tickets, and it was like surreal. There's 72,000 people in Pittsburgh, and we're all here to see Taylor Swift, and we're all dressed up. And she played some of my favorite songs for her surprise songs, and it was just one of those moments where you're like, "Whoa, this is intense, insane." And I mean, like my voice was gone. I had wore hearing protection, which highly recommend if you're going because it's screaming. A lot of 72,000 people just screaming constantly, and it's a great show. Taylor Swift puts on like a whole production. It was fantastic.
yes. I am so jealous, but also so excited that you got to go see her. I saw her when she was first starting out on debut and she was doing a college campus tour. And it was just her and her acoustic guitar. So I would
Yeah.
love to see how her production and stuff went now. But speaking of production, since that is your arena, we know you from SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, and you crush it all the time. Did you always want to be involved in media? And if so, where did that aspiration start?
Yeah, so from a very young age, I was introduced to media. My dad worked for NBC in Richmond, Virginia, as an editor for the news, NBC 12. And so I would constantly just be at the station. I was in some of their commercials growing up as like just their local fun stuff. And, I was just indicted into it very early. And I knew as I got older, like I was more interested in like what my dad was doing behind the scenes, what being on camera, making videos with my friends, doing just like fun photography projects. So I got very interested very young. And it's something that I decided when I went into college. I was like, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew it was communication, and I started off like declared it, and I was ready to roll. It was something I've just had in me the whole time, I guess. I love it.
Did you learn the tricks of the trade just kind of by watching, or were you actively like, show me this, show me this, show me this?
I was a very inquisitive child, so I'm sure I annoyed my parents enough with like, "What are you doing? What's this do? What's this button do?" And my dad would let me play on his programs. I remember vividly making like when 3D models were becoming a big thing in news, like making a teacup with my dad one day, and that was like one of the big moments where I was like, "This is so cool and so fun." And I was a very hands-on person. I'm also a very hands-on learner, so that's always been my kind of thing. It's fantastic, and I'm lucky that I had my parents always, like, pushed me to go after what I wanted to do and helped me grow in those areas and really supported me in it because, it's what I love, and I'm lucky that I love the same things my dad does. That's another, way we can bond. It's great.
It is really great. And it's just that right combination of sharing a love of something and then also having that support behind you. And you mentioned when you went into college, you went straight into communication. Was that where you got your first hands on experience with actually broadcasting for something, or what was that experience like?
Yeah, so my freshman year, they take the freshmen, the little babies all around to, like, the campus newspaper. I went to Longwood University in, Virginia, Farmville, Virginia, and, in middle of nowhere, and they took us around to their radio station, which is NPR sponsored, and they had this really neat studio, and I remember walking in and being like, "This is really cool. This is where I wanna be," and they told us, "After 6 hours, you can have your own show if you wanna do some training with us," and I was like, "That sounds like what I wanna do," so I joined the radio station, paid the, like, $20 fee to, like, join the group, and did my training within a week. And then I had my show called Keeping It Blunt with Shannon Blunt, which was a 2-hour talk hybrid show where I played whatever music I wanted, kind of talked about whatever I wanted. And it was just really got me interested in radio in general and broadcasting.
That is so fun, and I also love the name, and that just shows some
You
of your
gotta play off of
creativity.
it.
You have to, and it's so wonderful that, you just took charge, especially with 20 minutes of training, that's insane, but you already had that background, so I'm sure that that helped you. And you also evolved and became general manager soon after your show, right?
Yeah, so, after my freshman year of doing a whole year of radio, I became the chief trainer, and then after that, at the end of my sophomore year, I became general manager, which is essentially like the president, but also like you're overseeing it. It's all student run. I worked hand in hand with NPR because they sponsored everything there, and it was a lot. It was a lot of fun stuff to do, and I had about 60 people under me and like a whole staff, and we worked with some faculty to like all bring it together and do the logistics, but it was a big project and it was a lot of fun, and I credit that and Longwood University to my, like, success in radio because they really, like, set it up. Being a smaller school, I had a lot of opportunities that, some of the bigger schools that I've been to and talked to, they didn't get as many opportunities to be on air or do as much as I did, and it really, like, I think set me up for success and also fueled my love for, like, radio and broadcasting.
I think you're exactly right, with that, but being in charge of college kids as GM, I mean, even with faculty, especially as a college kid yourself, just has to be really challenging. I can't imagine keeping track and keeping everyone on schedule. So what were some of your favorite and then most challenging moments of being a manager?
Yeah, most challenging is there are a bunch of college kids that like inevitably became my best friends, we're constantly together. I was at the station, probably 20 hours a day just because it became my home away from home, and I became friends with these people, and then balancing that friendship versus kind of like boss mentality can be hard. And I even live with one of my roommate was in the radio as well, and that's how we met. And it's hard balancing that level of like, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but this is how it has to be kind of feel. And I never had too many issues that way, but like I had to be a step above and be a faculty member above a friend sometimes. And that's something you learn through just like repetition. And you want to be friends with them and you want to be like as good as you can be and not be a mean boss or be intimidating or let it ruin friendships. But sometimes it's there. Luckily, I did not have to deal with like ruining friendships over it. But my favorite parts, like we would put on this huge concert at the end of the year called Band Fest, where we would work with an agent and get these big bands like We the Kings, Cheat Codes, Bowling for Soup, like a bunch
Oh,
of cool bands would come and we would just get to hang out with them. I know We the Kings came my like freshman year and I got to be their like campus liaison. And then they also came my senior year and they remembered us. So that was really cool. And like I got to be in some of their like videos that they posted on their YouTube and just like being able to see the industry so close and being indicted in so many like just music along with like broadcasting and all this other event planning and meeting planning, working with agents. It was so cool. And it was this great opportunity that every moment I was like, wow, this is just insane. Like I get to do all this cool stuff.
and I think that that also fits in really well with what you do on Fantasy Alarm, and your experience in that area shows, especially with all the cool stuff that they do on the Fantasy Alarm show, the Jukebox Monday, and the Wheel of Randomness, which is incredible. So it's really fun to see how that has evolved into your professional life. Just things that you don't think necessarily in college that will work. But after college, did you plan to stay in radio broadcasting or were you more interested on the actual producer side of things?
I knew I wanted to stay in radio. I was realistic. I knew that like getting into the media industry is very hard and I was going to take whatever I got. I had applied, I think, to like 200 or 300 places before graduating, and I was just, like, waiting to hear back. I got a job in Richmond working for a local radio station, and, I was, like, their kind of, like, grunt worker, promotions assistant, remotes, going out and, like, carrying all the tables and merch and everything and being kind of, like, the face of the station, really fun and happy all the time, even though I'm standing outside for 8 hours and being happy. But, then I got to be their traffic girl as well, so I started being able to report traffic. So I knew when I started there at Summit Media in Richmond, I started to see more of what the background can do and like how fun it can be. And like I started getting involved more in the background of stuff. And it's just as fun as being on air. I was having such a good time planning, and it sounds kind of nerdy, just like planning every detail out and like reorganizing schedules and seeing how everything works. It became just as fun for me as being on air, which I do love being on air. If you can't tell when I pop the mic on Fantasy Alarm every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I love when you're on air, and I think that everybody listening agrees with us there. When you were doing traffic, were you like out on the sidelines or actual by the roadside, or were you just in studio, or how did that work?
Yeah, traffic was interesting. It was something they had asked. They had known I had been on air at in college, and they were like, "We need more traffic people because the hours are kinda crappy. So, like, could you work from, like, 4 AM to 10 AM?" And, like, it was 45-minute drive, so I'd get up at, like, 3, be there at 4, and we have access to all of, like, the VDOT information and all of the stuff, so I would just sit in the studio and update it every 10 minutes if there was accidents, and you had to be like really serious and have this like serious traffic reporter voice that like people would also come up to me and say that I pronounced road names wrong and that was fun, but it was cool. It was one of those things where it's like I'm on the radio. It's so fun.
So the mansplaining prepared you for your career in the fantasy sports world,
Always.
apparently. Even with road names. It happens everywhere, folks. So if I had to ask you, I guess you said that you loved doing both sides of things and that you loved planning. But if I had to ask you what the main difference between broadcasting and producing is, and which one do you prefer, what would that be?
Yeah, so a lot of planning goes into both sides. A lot of what you don't see is when you're on air, like I am right now, you've got to be on, and you've got to be prepared for whatever kind of like throws your like is thrown your way, and just kind of like monitoring news and all this other stuff. But the producers are doing that as well as listening to the show, making sure they can hop in at a blink of an eye. They're monitoring news. We're monitoring all of our systems to make sure you guys are getting a product. So the biggest difference is just like focus. Like the focus is different. So I would say producing is probably harder from what I have experienced personally, just because there's so many moving parts. And like if you're not focused on everything, you miss one thing, the whole show can like fall apart pretty quickly. Because not only am I making sure everything tech wise is running, I'm making sure Howard and Jim and Fancy and Ronas, they're all playing nice and having a good time and being fun. And I'm answering your phone calls and making sure that you get like produce they can be on air. All of our listeners and viewers can get their voice heard as well. And it's just a massive amount of things that you're doing in the background that people just I don't think they realize.
Yeah, I didn't realize the level of multitasking that went into that. How do you balance that when you're, I mean, compartmentalizing listening and then answering and then planning, like watching the clock? What are some strategies that you use to just keep everything on the rails?
It's definitely come with reps. You had to get used to it for sure. Multitasking, lots of screens. I've got like 3 or 4 screens you can't even see, just monitoring different things. I've got my phone on a stand so I could see if someone texts me or bothers me or needs something. I'm lucky that I have a great co-producer, Josh Wagner, who I work with every day, and we're a great team. So getting a good team together. So like when you need Slack in an area, we can just communicate. But communication is probably like key to it. Because like if you're not communicating, if I'm like, hey, I need to answer some phone calls, so can you just like monitor everything else going on? Like that is the key. Like he has to pick up Slack when I need it, and I need to pick up Slack when he needs it. And it's just reps and communication is like the biggest takeaway.
Great advice for all aspects of life everywhere. And before we get into talking about sports, I want to shout out to some people in the chat. There is Better Boss in with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Scampers, always. Then we've got Gemma, who has been a guest on the show. Hi, Gemma. And then we have Kevin Tompkins, the other part of the Joe Burrow fan club. Guys
Yeah.
in the chat, if y'all have any questions for Shannon, please feel free to throw these in here and we will get to them before the end of the show. But now let's talk about the meat. Now that we've talked about the nuts and bolts, let's talk about the fun stuff. So you were into baseball before you started in media. Where did your love for the sport start, and how did you get so great that you earned the nickname the Shandy Capper?
Yeah, baseball. I started playing like t-ball at like the age of 4 or 5. My parents, put me, as most parents do, in different sports to see what I would love, and I stuck with baseball and softball because I became so like invested in it. And also I knew my grandfather, he was a huge baseball fan. He's the reason I'm a Nats fan because he liked the Nationals so much. Like even for his 90th birthday, they rented out a box and stayed and watched the whole game, and it's great. So my love of baseball is pretty family oriented, but playing it became like this whole other part of me that I got to be a catcher. I was an outfielder. I was like an all-star catcher. It was my favorite thing to do. I loved like carrying around the gear and just like being in the world of baseball. And so I started loving baseball from an early age. And I guess the Shandy Capper thing, I don't know if it was a Howard Bender creation or a Brian Burns creation. I have a lot of nicknames on the show. I love them. It's one of my favorite things, the bits that have come in, and I just am collecting nicknames now. One day I should just get them all like written down and framed because it's just constantly growing. But the Shandy Capper came when I started getting into betting and sports betting, which I stumbled upon, joining this community. We're going to do some betting. We're going to talk about betting. And I've learned a lot from all of these great analysts that I get to work with every day. But I was like on a hot streak for betting. And I think I just became like, oh, she's the Shandy Capper. Like she's got it. Like you need to listen to her. So I'm sorry if some of my bets haven't hit for you guys. I don't think I'm on a hot streak right now, in fact, but that came from a nice hot streak that I was. And I think it was like around this year, at the end of like I would do anytime touchdowns. And
You
I
were
love
so good.
anytime touchdown bet. And I was just one of those things where it was just like, yes, I felt it in my guts. And the Shandy Capper came from my gut feelings and a hot streak.
I can definitely attest that you are one of the best at the anytime touchdown props, and I made a little bit of money by listening to you. So, guys, listen to Shan. And then Josh in the chat says that that definitely sounds like a Bender nickname. I think that I would have to agree with
Yeah.
that. So, what do you prefer more, baseball or football? And in real life and in playing fantasy sports?
So for real life, I do prefer baseball. Opening day, just like Jim Bowden, it's like a holiday for me. I love it. I watch baseball constantly when it's on. So I prefer baseball. I go to a lot of baseball games. I'm a big Steelers fan. Don't ask me where that came from. I think it was from a family member, or maybe it was from watching them win a bunch of times since I've been born. So I'm very into football, and I started off as a baseball fan, and when I got this job I told them like, hey, I know a lot about football, but I am a baseball fan. So it works out because fantasy, you can play fantasy for a lot of sports, and it happened to be baseball was my first love, but now I've been like introduced to the world of fantasy football, and I've gotten very invested even from like I think my first week we did a whole like football draft, or like we were constantly drafting when I started, and so I got to experience more and more, and I think I like playing fantasy football more than fantasy baseball, if I'm honest. I think it's just a little more fun for me. It's a little more like ongoing, a lot less moving parts, I feel like, than baseball, because there's just so many players in baseball. There's so many people coming up that you have to watch, and like as much as I love doing that, like football, it's just, and there's more people involved that I know, in my personal life that play fantasy football, and I can experience that with them and share it with them. And I love that. Being able to share fantasy with other people makes it really fun.
And that is I mean, you said it exactly right. That is what is one of the best things about fantasy football is sharing it and talking about it with your friends and talking about it, on SiriusXM, jumping in, and y'all do several segments on that. And speaking of the segments, which ones have you kind of had a hand in creating, and which ones are your favorite on that show?
So for Fantasy Alarm, I've come up with a lot of segments. Like today, we're going to be doing Take Two Tuesday. And that's just where we share two hot takes of a topic that we have, and like we kind of debate it, and that always ends up in a great discussion, a great heated discussion normally, and it's fantastic. And I love that segment a lot. That's a newer one. A lot of the segments that I love are like some of our like classic segments. I love Jukebox Monday. What you can't see behind the scenes is normally we're jamming out to it, and I'm doing a very bad karaoke version of it and just belting that they can't even hear on air, and it's fantastic, just the reactions we get from each other, and, Wheel of Randomness has to be, like, my favorite segment in the entire world because it wasn't mine to start out with. I came in and I started being able to take over Wheel of Randomness, and it just became like my own thing, and I really loved it. I love asking the guys random questions that they have to answer honestly, and I like putting them on the spot. Like, what was the last text message that you received? Like, you have to read it out loud. Or what was the last thing you Googled? Or like things like that. And you never really know what you're gonna get with like Jim Bowden and Howard Bender, what they're gonna. So I have to be prepared for that. But just like Josh Hudson, love letters is one of my favorite. I love letters. I keep it all of my love letters that I've written over the past year or so, I keep because I just find it so fun to write them, to put them out there, to see how people react to them. Those are the ones that I'm getting a lot of tweets at where people are like, "Oh my god, this love letter was fantastic. I really relate to this. I was dying laughing." Those are like I love letters. It's a great concept and it's a great time, you know?
Well, I remember your very first one, and I was flabbergasted and floored with just how amazing it was. What kind of inspiration goes into your love letters? Is it like a thought out kind of plan thing, or is it just whatever pops in your head?
So we'll have a meeting every morning and we'll be like, okay, it's a love letter day, like make sure you have one. And then normally I would be going into DC on those days and I would be thinking about it on my way in, like what do I want to write about? What's hot in the news? How am I feeling? How's my fantasy team doing? Kind of just picking around. And then it would take me about like 10 minutes to write before the show. And I would just kind of let my heart tell me what to write and what to feel. And or if I know some days I wrote poems about fantasy football, like the night before playoffs and stuff like that. And it's just one of those things where it's like, if I'm feeling it and my personality is in it and I'm having a good time, it will translate to those like viewers and listeners that, with radio, you have to add the extra step of like they can't see it. So you have to put it in their head that like this whole view, like besides TV, when you get to see the people talking and you get to see the radio, you don't get that. So it's just an extra step of like adding that background music to with the writing and the pen and adding your voice emotion into it more. And it's so fun. I love letters more than probably any other segment.
I love thinking about all the layers that you just described because that's something as a listener that I've never really thought about. I've just thought about talking. But as a producer, there's so many different things that go into it and it's just incredible what you do and just how you put everything together and make such a successful show. And part of being on the show, you are in Scott Fishbowl for the first time this
Yes.
season, and it's a ton of fun. What spot are you picking out of? What's your division? And do you have any strategy going into it?
Yeah, so this is my first Scott Fishbowl. This was on and we had fantasy like a bucket list that we did at the end of the year, and my big thing was I wanted to join the Scott Fishbowl. I've been in the industry like in this industry and community for like 3 years now, and I just really wanted to join in because I'd seen how much people love and have a good time with their Scott Fishbowl leagues. And I'm in the Starbucks division, I believe, and I am in with Jim Bowden. So that's another fun thing we'll
Ah,
be able to talk about on air that if I'm beating Jim Bowden, which is probably going to happen, that we'll be able to bring it up to you guys and the listeners and be able to talk about it. As far as my strategy goes, I know it's a super flex. I know quarterbacks are going to be going off the board pretty quickly. I'm picking out of the second spot. So I really like that spot. And this might be a reach, but I know from what I've learned in fantasy, it's like you got to play your own way and you got to make yourself happy because if you're happy with your team, you're probably going to have a better time. You're probably going to be like more invested in it. And so like I probably will be reaching and grabbing Joe Burrow in that second spot because every time I've had Joe Burrow on a team, I'm happy and I want a good quarterback. So that's probably my strategy. I hope the person who's drafting first doesn't take him now that I said that out loud, but we'll see. But I'll probably be reaching for a good quarterback at least in that spot.
I think that's a solid strategy. And Mr. Scamper's two spot first timer as well. So you guys
Nice.
should get in the chat and talk about that on Twitter. There's so many fun group chats going around.
Oh yeah.
I think you made a really good point about having fun because so many people treat fantasy like it's kind of work and like it or they take it too seriously and get upset with it. So that's just an excellent point to remember to have fun with it. Have you looked at any of the rules in Scott Fishbowl about the changes? And if so, how do you feel about like the little tweaks that they have made this year?
I haven't looked at the changes, and I'm not sure if I'll actually be affected by the tweaks just because it is my first time going in, and now I'm just like, "This is all I'm gonna know going into the Scott Fishbowl," but I'm in this great group chat of all the people in the 2nd, pick, and we constantly talk, and I'm getting all of my strategy and tips and tricks from them because all of these people have seem to have drafted out of the 2nd spot before, and they're giving me breakdowns of everything. So it's a great tool if you're not in a group chat with everyone else who's drafting in your spot and the other divisions, I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. That's I can attest my first time that group chat was pretty invaluable to me and all the advice that I got. And then we've got Jorge in the chat, Starbucks division for the win.
Nice.
So
Fun.
that's perfect. Hope that you don't have the number one pick, Jorge. Don't
It
steal
did with
Shan's
any
strategy.
lemonade.
So we're getting up against it, but if anybody has any questions for Shannon, throw them in the chat and we'll get to them real quick. But since this is called Her Story in the Making, where do you see your story continuing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love radio and I got to join this wonderful community that I joined this as a radio job. I didn't know too much about fantasy. I had played in fantasy maybe once or twice before joining SiriusXM, but um, I just I can see myself now. I'm so into this community and I love the people that I've met and like the opportunities I've been given because of the people in this community. Like I can't imagine leaving the fantasy community anymore. It's something that I've been sports media is now in my soul. And so I can see myself. I love SiriusXM. I love having this job. I don't foresee myself leaving in the future, but growing and becoming a better producer every day is something that I can see, and I hope that happens because, like I said, this community is fantastic, and it's something I didn't expect. Joining fantasy sports radio as a producer, I thought I'd be in the background. I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to talk to you or be on air and talk about my bets, my winning bets, and being a shandy capper and all this other fun stuff. But this is a great community, and I see myself growing in it more. And I don't know, we can see me talking more about maybe let's do a whole Joe Burrow segment or a Juan Soto segment, my 2 guys. And it's just a fantastic community.
I I think that I have to agree. All of the work that you've done over there is excellent. I hope that we hear you more. Coop has a question for you. I'm sure he's not looking for himself as an answer. A question for Shan, who's your favorite fantasy alarm show semi-regular guest?
Semi-regular guests. We don't have too many guests lately, but it would probably be anyone from the Fantasy Alarm crew just because of the community and also like the personalities that we get to see mesh with the guys on air. It's always just you guys have a great connection. And the Fantasy Alarm crew people are, are fantastic. Kevin Thompson says to choose me, but
Yep.
I'll go with just the Fantasy Alarm crew and community of just they've been the best guests and some of our constant callers like Kangas Man and it's just those people who have been in the show and invested in the community and the show just make the show better.
And that's why we say that we are family because it is. It's just like a big group of friends and people who enjoy similar interests and they couldn't do the show without all your hard work and all your contributions and we love listening to you. Please tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ShannonB_LUNT. And just because we joke about it on the show, you can find me on my TikTok at ShannonNanner1. If you guys want to see some Animal Crossing TikToks, there you go.
I'm gonna add you right after the show because I definitely would love some Animal Crossing TikToks. Thank you guys in the chat for joining us. Shan, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll be back in 2 weeks on July 11th with Ashley Hart of She Plays at our normal time at 8:30 Eastern. So we will see you then.